So there's a mitzvah of Simchas Yom Tov D'Oraisa D'Rabbanan. So actually, that's a discussion, the Gemara in Moekata, and it's actually a double machlokes between the Rambam and Tosas. The Gemara talks about the principle of what happens if someone's an Avel on Yom Tov. Someone, Rahman loses one of the relatives and they're in Avelis. So what happens on Yom Tov? So the Gemara tells us in Moekata on Yotav Yudalid that the Simcha D'Rabim, the public mitzvah Simcha, beats out the private mitzvah mourning. Simcha is a public affair. The whole Jewish people are obligated in Simcha, the whole Klal Yisrael. But Avelis is a private affair. You lose a parent, a brother, sister, whoever you lose, it's a private affair of Avelis. So the public mitzvah Simcha overrides the private mitzvah of Avelis. That's the Gemara. So there's a machlokes Rambam and Tosfos on what exactly is the lumdus behind it. So the Rambam writes the mitzvah of Simcha, even Mizman Hazeh, is D'Oraisa. Today, next week, Shavuot, there's a mitzvah D'Oraisa of Simcha, even though we don't have a Beis HaMikdash, we don't have the Karban, but nevertheless, Simcha could be done in other ways, and therefore the Rambam's opinion is it's not linked to the Karban, and therefore Simcha is D'Oraisa. And Tosfos disagrees and writes Simcha is only D'Rabbanan. Without the Beis HaMikdash, we only have a rabbinical mitzvah. So they point out that really it's a double machlokes. The Rambam's opinion is by Avelis. Avelis Yom Rishon is D'Oraisa. The machlokes Rishonim between the Rambam and the Bali Tosfos, which is basically a machlokes Sfardim Ashkenaz. So the Sfardim hold Avelis Yom Rishon is D'Oraisa, and we, meaning Bnei Ashkenaz, hold even Yom Rishon is only D'Rabbanan. The whole concept of Avelis today, Nihugi Avelis, is only D'Rabbanan. So the Rambam warns the Gemara as follows. There's a mitzvah of Simcha D'Oraisa today. There's a mitzvah of Avelis D'Oraisa today. So you have a conflict on two biblical mitzvahs. So why does Simcha win? So that's what the Gemara is telling us. The mitzvah D'Rabbanan of Simcha beats out the private biblical mitzvah of Avelis. And Tosfos learns the opposite. The Tosfos sheet is Simcha today is only D'Rabbanan. This coming next week, Shavuot, it's a mitzvah D'Rabbanan. And Avelis is only D'Rabbanan. So you have a conflict. There's no Avelis on Yom Tov. Again, so the Gemara says the public mitzvah of Simcha beats out the private mitzvah D'Rabbanan. So it's consistent. There's interesting shaila in the Rishonim. What happens if you have a public rabbinical mitzvah versus a private biblical? Of course, if you have a public biblical versus a private rabbinical, the public's going to win. So whether it's D'Oraisa D'Rabbanan, what happens if you have a public biblical, a public rabbinical versus a private? Where does the Gemara discuss it? That's the Gemara, the Rishonim discusses the famous Gemara in Brachas on Daf Mem Zayin, I believe. The Gemara talks about that Rabbi Eliezer came to Shul one day and he didn't have a minyan. But luckily he brought his Eved Kanani with him. And the Gemara says he was Meshacher, he freed his Eved Kanani. In fact, one time I was speaking, actually it was at the Bayit many years ago, and I was saying over this Gemara, so a person came over to me and said, "You're making me feel so bad." I said, "What are you talking about?" I said a lot of things, I didn't know what he was referring to. He said, Rabbi Eliezer freed his slave. It must have been a slave is an expensive thing. It's almost probably like an Acura. It's an expensive thing. So therefore, this person was willing to sell his car to make a minyan, and I live around the block. He says, I don't go to minyan. So I said, start going then. But either way, so the Gemara says that Rabbi Eliezer freed his slave, so a tremendous amount of money, but he freed his slave. So the Gemara says, but forget about the money issue. You're not allowed to free a slave. The Gemara says, the Torah says, all of the tavod, there's a special halacha that you can't free your slave. Under different conditions, it's not for now. So the Gemara answers, you're right, normally you can't, but the Gemara says, it's a mitzvah. But since it's a mitzvah, presumably we're talking about tefillah b'tzibur. There's a mitzvah to daven with a minyan, so therefore the mitzvah of tefillah b'tzibur beats it out. The Gemara says, what do you mean mitzvah? Didn't you learn the Gemara in Sukkah? We have a principle, mitzvah haba ba'avera. We have a principle, let's say the classical case is the Gemara in Sukkah, lulav hagazel. You have this halacha lakachtem lachem. you have to own your own daled minim in order to shake the lulav. Again, it doesn't mean you have to actually buy one. Pi halacha means if it could be mine, I could give it to Yossi for the next 30 seconds, matana manas lahagzir, you own it, and that's also okay. It means halachically owned. Because halacha has to, so if someone steals a lulav, besides violating the avera of stealing, it's a meaningless activity. It doesn't get the mitzvah anyway, so you're better off just not doing the mitzvah and skip the avera of stealing. So the question is, what about here? Mitzvah ba avera. Why don't we say it here? How could you free a slave to do a mitzvah? The Gemara says, good point. However, mitzvah derabim shani. A public mitzvah is different. You're right, normally when you have a mitzvah diyachid, we apply the principle of mitzvah ba avera. But a mitzvah derabim, a public mitzvah for Klal Yisrael, for the tzibur, so that has a higher level of chashivas, and therefore we say it overrides the avera of olam mehem ta'avodo. So the question is, what do we see from this Gemara? So if we say we're talking about tefillah b'tzibur, let's assume that's only derabanan at best, and then we're talking about freeing your slave is a isser aseh. So we're talking about violating a biblical prohibition, a private biblical prohibition, freeing a slave, versus a public rabbinical mitzvah of making a minyan. So we see, so some Rishonim want to bring a raya from this Gemara, that we see a public, how chashav is a mitzvah derabim, even a public rabbinic mitzvah beats out a private biblical mitzvah. The context, I think, the Bahag's talking about, Tosfos over there quotes this machlokas. He quotes by the case of Yom Tov Achron is where it comes up for Sfardim. Because we all know we have Yom Tov Sheni and Chutz La'aretz. So Yom Tov Sheni is only D'Rabbanan according to everyone. So even Simcha, even according to the Rambam, Yom Tov Sheni is only D'Rabbanan. So what do you do then? The Shaila is the last day of Yom Tov. When you have Avelis, you have a case where someone, the Avelis Yom Rishon, on the last day, Avelis Yom Rishon is Daraisa. So that's the case. You have a biblical private mitzvah versus a public rabbinical mitzvah of Simcha. So that's the machlokas Rishonim on that issue. That's where so some quote we see from this Gemara that's the pshat why the mitzvah derabim of Simchas Yantif would again it comes out as machlokas Rishonim what to do, but that's the issue whether a mitzvah derabim derabanan beats out a private biblical. Some want to say you can't bring a proof from this Gemara based on a rush, something the rush says not to say, but we could say it. What is the rush? Is the famous rush? It has to do with Parashat Zachar, but the rush writes that, and don't tell me, what this Gemara is talking about? Parashat Zachar, because we all know this halacha that normally Kriyas HaTorah is Ezra Misak and Birkas HaTorah. That's Thursday night shir. That could be a mitzvah in HaTorah. I mean that's by Birkas HaTorah. I mean the bracha we make every morning, not whether you're home or away, in the Birkas HaShachar. The bracha you make at Kriyas HaTorah, that's only rabbinical. Because Kriyas HaTorah itself, most of the time is only a Takanas Ezra, Takanas Moshe. Even if it's a Takanas Moshe, it's still only D'Rabbanan. Moshe Rabbeinu made rabbinical laws as well. So Kriyas HaTorah is only D'Rabbanan. So the issue is, so there's different shittas in the Rishon of how do you fulfill your mitzvah in HaTorah of Parashat Zachar. At the end of Parashat Kitzitz, it says, remember what Amalek did to us, so what does that mean? So you have the Rambam Shita so the Gemara tells us that it's a Zachar and Lo Sishkach, so therefore thinking about it doesn't help. From Lo Sishkach I know believe Zachar means Beped. Just like we have a similar drush of Zachar V'Shamar by Kiddush Friday night. So everyone agrees Zachar doesn't just mean having a moment of silence, that doesn't cut it. You have to verbalize. How much more? So according to the Rambam, that's it. And according to the Rambam, right now, I just fulfilled my mitzvah of Zechiras Amalek. I spoke about what Amalek did. And so according to the Rambam, it's probably a mitzvah every day of the year as well, and it's not linked to Kriyas HaTorah at all. Tosfos and Brachas and Megillah introduces the concept of Parashat Zachar with the Sefer Torah, our practice, and the Rush takes it a step further. Our minig is to hear, and people make a big deal, even the women coming to shul, which they're probably exempt Me'ikar Adin, but not that they shouldn't come and hear it anyway. But because we volunteer mitzvahs aseh shazman grama, or mitzvahs that we're exempt from. So what does the Rush say? The Rush says, don't tell me when Rabbi Eliezer freed his slave, we're really talking about a biblical mitzvah. It was Parashat Zachar that Shabbos. So he says, don't say that, but what But what does that mean? Don't say it. What does that have to do with the minyan? Obviously, the Rosh is telling us that week wasn't Parashat Zachar, but he's telling me something fundamental about Parashat Zachar. Parashat Zachar requires a minyan, or else why is he bringing it up? So based on this Rosh, he says not to say it, but obviously if he says not to, there's room to say it. So therefore, if you want to argue that it is Parashat Zachar, so then you could argue then those cheetahs who hold that you can't that you don't bring that a public rabbinical mitzvah doesn't be in a private biblical will say this is an araya. We'll say it's Parashat Zachar, or there are other ways of wording it. So either way, there's a machlokas in general. Rambam and Tosas regarding Simchas Yom Tov, but it ties into the Avelos as well, how you learn that Gemara, but the bottom line is no Avelos on Yom Tov, because the mitzvah Simcha D'Rabim overrides the Avelos to Yochid. So how does one fulfill the mitzvah Simcha? So we discussed Bizman Shabeis HaMikdash Kayam Basa V'Yayin, and Bizman Hazeh minimally Yayin, even within the Rambam, let's say Bizman Hazeh, do you actually have to have meat or not? So it depends on, that's a machlokas in the Rishonim Achronim, whether the mitzvah Simcha entails basar. So others point out that we see it subjective, because the Gemara tells us what's Simcha. The men like the meat and potatoes, the ribs and the fries. The women go for the jewelry and the dresses. And the kids go for the good stuff, the chips, the candy. So we see Rabbi Aaron Salvation points out that Simcha is subjective, so perhaps if someone likes dairy food better, this is what to rely on. It's ironic how it sounds that there's more, I'd say the minig Yisrael, I'm not saying al pi halach, I'm just talking pragmatically what I see. Most people I know usually have meat on Shabbos, but a lot of people I know have dairy on Yom Tov. So I'm not saying you can't, but if anything, it should be strictly al pi halacha. It's only a mitzvah of owning on Shabbos. There's more of an Indian, not a chiyuv, but there's more of an Indian to have meat on Yom Tov than it is to have Shabbos. But there's Indian to have meat both times, but there's more of a chiyuv. And the truth be told, Pari Purim, al pi halacha, if you look in the Shulchan Aruch, that's probably the strictest day of the year that you should have. Of all days, if you only could pick one day to have basar, strictly al pi halacha, probably Purim would win, that you should have basar on Purim. People have dairy on Purim. Well, again, you Yotze Yisud without it, but in terms of, in Yonim and Hiddur. So they point out, except of course, in the question that comes up on Shavuot, many have a minig. Shavuot people already have a minig of eating dairy. More so, cheesecake and all that. So people have different minhagim. Some have a minig to have dairy first, then they do the Netilas Shadayim, and then they eat the meat. That's what the Gemara tells us in the Russian call Mayim Emsayim. We know it is Mayim Rishonim. Before you eat bread, you wash, and you make a bracha on. Mayim Achronim, we know some of them are not to do it, but in fact there's some shittas that if you don't have Mayim Achronim, you can't even eat bread. We don't assume that way, and there's some shittas you even make a bracha Mayim Achronim. We don't pass it that way either. But Mayim Emsam, no one says to make a bracha on. So why is that? The Mayim Emsam, so what is the middle waters? If you're having a meal and you want to separate the milk and meat, you have to wash your hands in between to make sure that there's no residue. So that's the general principle, is anytime you're doing something to avoid an Isser, you don't make a bracha. You only make a bracha, Chazal instituted a bracha only if there's a Kiyam HaMitzvah. If you're doing something to avoid an Aveira, there's no bracha involved. So therefore, Mayim Emsam, that would come up on Shavuot if a person had a minig to have first dairy, then meat. Others have different minhagim, they split up the meals, it's different minhagim. But there's more of an Indian, of all the Yom Tovim on Shavuot, there's a more of a prevalent minig to have dairy. So getting back, so there's a mitzvah of Simcha. So how do you fulfill this mitzvah of Simcha? So the Gemara in Psachim, Samachet quotes to Machlokas, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Eliezer. How does one celebrate on Yom Tov? So because the Gemara quotes an apparent contradiction in the Psukim. One pasuk says, Asheres tiyeh lachem. It's all about us. Lachem, it's for us. We have to enjoy the Yom Tov, the good food and the good stuff, sleep, whatever we like doing. And then, however, but the Gemara quotes another, Asheres la'Hashem Elokecha. Then the Atzeret, and again, so Atzeret is known as Shavuot. And the reason is because, as the Ramban points out, that this whole period we're in right now, Sfiras HaOmer, that's the bridge between Pesach and Shavuot. And he calls these days the Chol Shel Moed. These days between Pesach and Shavuot, right now, we're in a Chol Hamoed period. It's bridging the gap between Yetzias Mitzrayim and Matan Torah. As Chazal tell us, the whole purpose of Yetzias Mitzrayim was to receive the Torah in Har Sinai. And then it's a whole discussion in the Sfira about whether, what aspect are we counting up to Matan Torah, or we're going back from Yetzias Mitzrayim? And the answer, of course, is both. We can't forget where we came from, but we also need, to know the right direction where we're going. So the question is, how is Shavuot called an Atzeres? What do you mean the end, the closing? Minat Torah, Shavuot is one day. I understand Shmini Atzeres. You went through Yantiv, and now the last day, Shmini Atzeres. But what's Shavuot being an Atzeres? So that's the pshat is, it's a conclusion of the Yantiv of Pesach. In fact, that's how some Rishonim write. There's a famous kasha, where's the Shechianu by Sfirat Omer? That we have a general principle, we make a Shechianu and a mitzvah She'eino Tadir that doesn't, that comes once in a while. So the famous kasha of the Baal Hamor and others, how come we don't make a Shechianu? So the Baal Hamor writes, it's only a mitzvah sheyesh b'hana. Here we're so down the Agmas Nefesh, we don't have the Beis HaMikdash, so he gives reason. But I think it's Rabbeinu Yerucham. Others point out, the Avnei Nezer, that we do make it, but the Shechianu we make on Shavuot is the one that's showing the link between Pesach and Shavuot. In fact, the Meiri writes the opposite. The Shechianu is on the second day of Pesach. I guess it only works if you're in Chutz La'aretz. I'm not sure if you're making a Shechianu the second night in Eretz Yisrael. But that's the concept of, it's a clear link between Pesach and Shavuot. So they point out, so how do you celebrate? Is it Teres Yelachem? So you have a machlokes, Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, what to do then? So we have a apparent contradiction in the psukim. So how do we reconcile? So Rabbi Eliezer, so then Rabbi Yosef Egel points out, we know we have a principle. If you have a contradiction in the two psukim, you find the third pasuk and you get the answer. Kasha Rabbi Yosef Egel asks, what happens if you don't find the third pasuk? So this is the machlokes, Rabbi Yeshua on this nakuda. Let's say you don't have a third pasuk. So this is the Rabbi Eliezer says you have a choice, kulo Hashem or kulo lachem. So you have a choice, and either or. Of course, Rabbi Eliezer would have to agree. You have to have a suda if you have a chiyuv of Simchas Yantiv. But we all know there's a fundamental difference between having a meal tonight and having a meal on Yantiv. Tonight, maybe it's 2 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, maybe a long meal, 20 minutes during the week. On Yantiv, we could be sitting 3 hours. So in terms of making it festive, that you said you would have to do. Of course, you have to make kiddush and have a suda. So Rabbi Eliezer says, Kulu Hashem or Kulu Lachem. If we don't have a third pasuk, you get to choose. In fact, and that's why it's the famous Gemara in Beya, where common practice today, as the Rebbe is giving shiur, the longer the shiur goes on, more people start packing out. As he's going on and on, Rabbi Eliezer, people I guess going out because maybe they'll follow the other opinion. You have to have a suda, and he gets upset at the people who are going out at the end. But Rabbi Eliezer says basically you have a choice either or. But basically you can focus on learning Kul Hashem. And Rabbi Yeshua says no. You know what you do when you don't have a third pasuk? You compromise. You do both. Chatzi Lashem v'chatzi lachem. And that's the way we paskin. The Rambam writes. And even though the Gemara talks about it by Yantiv, but the Rambam applies it to Shabbos as well, and he even gives a seder. It's first Chatzi Lashem v'Chatzi Lachem. So what do? We daven Ma'ariv Friday night, then we have our Suda. We daven Shacharis, we have our Suda. And Me'ikar Adin, the Uchatchila, I should say, it's best to have Shalosh Shudas after Mincha. But Me'ikar Adin, you don't have to, but you should wait for the Zman Mincha, even if sometimes, shuls don't have Shalosh Shudas, but really part of Chatzi Lachem, it's best, the Rav points out in the Vilna Gaon, but you should have first, if you could, daven Mincha and then eat the Shalosh Shudas, because it gives a whole seder of Chatzi Lashem, v'Chatzi Lachem. In fact, that's why there's a discussion, especially on, let's say, early Shabbos, as I say, it's every week's early Shabbos, we make Tosefes Shabbos, but what we call early Shabbos, you have to paga Mincha. So most of us do as the shuls, they daven, we try to make it Mincha before Plag, Ma'ariv after, and then we repeat Kriya Shema later on, etc. So I think it's Rabbeinu Yonah's Shita that writes that this, daven Mincha, maybe Kabbalah Shabbos, and then go have your meal, and then when you finish your meal, 3 hours later, whatever it is, go daven Ma'ariv in Zman. So, and and it's feasible in yeshivas to do this because people aren't going and coming back. If you try it in shuls, you're not going to have a minyan. So once you send people back, they're not coming back so easy. So in a place where people live in the same, so that's what some Rishonim say that, but the Vilna Gaon was against that practice because what we're saying here, you should have Chatzi L'Hashem, Chatzi L'Chem. Again, you go to the Yisuda, but he says one should daven first and then go ahead and have the Suda. So that's the discussion.
Why are we defining? Why does all the Yachon define the Suda as Lachem? If it's a mitzvah, so why would obviously there's the enjoyment aspect of it, but it is a mitzvah to have the Suda. So why is that defined as Lachem as opposed to being Lashem?
No, but look, we know there's a mitzvah Simchas Yom Tov, so there's two parts. There's Lefnei Hashem Elokecha, that's the source of Simchas Yom Tov. So the Gemara is talking about Lashem in terms of more spiritual things like davening, learning, etc. And Lachem meaning your, in the context, Lachem here means for your enjoyment. Not doesn't mean that we don't enjoy davening and learning, whether we do or not academic. But that's not what it's more. That's from the Gemara we see that. In Turkey, it's talking in terms of Suda, as I'll get to in a minute. You'll see clearly why in a second. How I know it's talking about Suda. So the Gemara says, so that's the Machlokas of Yeshua Rebbe Lezer. So according to Rebbe Lezer, you don't really have to have a big Suda on Pesach, on Yom Tov. However, the Gemara continues this, Hakol Modim, everybody agrees, even Rabbi Eliezer, when it comes to the Yom Tov of Shavuot, Ba'ina Lachem. Even Rabbi Eliezer, who normally says, don't worry about the Suda, just have a quick Lachem Mishnah bread, move on, you don't really need a Lachem Suda. But even Rabbi Eliezer agrees, when it comes to Shavuot, you have to have a festive meal. The Gemara asks, my taima? Why should Shavuot be different than Pesach and Sukkot? So the Gemara actually strengthens the question, but the Gemara answers, Yom Shenitna Bo Torah. It was the day the Torah was given. So that just makes the question even stronger. So that's the day I would have thought, well, let's just say, let's learn all day, and that's the day we shouldn't have to have a student. Yom Shenitna Bo Torah, and the Gemara goes on to says also Purim, even by Shabbos. The Gemara over there that you have to have. The Rebbe Lezer agrees Lachem. You have to have a Suda by Purim and Shabbos. It's well based on the Psukim there. So in fact, so what's the Pshat Yom Shenitna Bo Torah? So therefore, we see from the Ramban and others that we see a tremendous yisod. Number one, al pi halacha, then we'll discuss it al pi hashkafa. But any time there's any accomplishment by Torah, you have to have a chi of Suda. That's the minhag. When you have a siyam, you make a meal or some food. But it goes back to Maimed Har Sinai. The Torah tells us in Parshas Mishpatim, Vayochu Vayishtu. It says when they go back talking about Har Sinai, it says the Jewish people were a bunch of party animals. They were partying at Har Sinai. Vayochu Vayishtu, and so some weren't that critical. But the Ramban writes as a Gosheva. We see from here, Bikan Lomdim, from any type of accomplishment in Torah, any type of event which Torah, we have a chi of Suda's Haldah, you have the obligation to make a Suda. And in fact, that's the pshat that Shiltas points out. There's a famous question. We know Hanukkah and Purim are very similar. They're both post-biblical, the rabbinical holidays, and there are many similarities. So when you have a difference, you ask, why is there a difference? So one of the differences is, on Purim there's a chi of Suda. You have an obligation to have a meal. And even though it's a discussion, we pass on Hanukkah. It's praiseworthy. That's why the Ramah says you should have a meal and sing shiros with tishbachos, have divrei Torah, and make it into a Suda's mitzvah. But we pass, and strictly speaking, you don't have to have a Suda on Hanukkah. But Purim, so what's the difference? There's a famous answer of the Lavush. The Lavush says, because there's a difference between the persecution on Hanukkah and the persecution on Purim. Purim was was physical, and therefore we have to celebrate in a physical way. We have a Suda. But Hanukkah wasn't that they wanted us dead, they wanted us to take on the Simwait and take on the Greek religion. So therefore we celebrated the spiritual way, Hallel, and the Hanukkah, the lights of Torah. That's the famous answer of Dovush. However, the Shiltas has another, Shiltas Rav Achai has another answer relevant to us. He says, you know why Purim has the Chi of Suda? Because based on the famous Gemara in Shabbos, Peches 88, the famous Gemara about the Torah tells us in Parashas Yisro, Vayityatzvu b'tachti sahar. And the Jewish people were sitting underneath the mount, and the Gemara tells us, Kol finalav har kegigas. The Gemara tells us that God said, put the mount overhead and said, if you receive the Torah, good. If not, here will be a burial. So they made the right choice. They said yes. But then the Gemara says, but what are you talking about? Mikan mo derabba daraisa. From here we see the Torah is not binding, because we know the halacha is, if someone puts a gun to your head and says, promise me you're going to owe me this or you do that, whatever commitment you make, it's meaningless, because any commitment under duress, it's obvious why you're telling the guy, because you want him to get, you don't want him to kill you or whatever he's going to do. So therefore, the whole Torah wasn't binding then, the Gemara asked. So the Gemara says, you're right. However, it says, Kimu v'kiblu, during the time of Purim, we reaccepted the Torah out of Ava. In fact, that's the famous kasha they asked. So what about the people with stuck, or were lucky, either way you want to look at it. But what about the people before Purim, so that they didn't have to keep the Torah shouldn't have been binding? Yet we know, last week's Parasha Shemitah, that the Jews were thrown out of Eretz Yisrael for not keeping the laws of Shemitah. So what kind of minimum? So how can they be punished for not keeping Shemitah if they didn't have to keep it? So that's the famous Orach Chaim, the many answers on the famous kasha on why does the Torah single out Shemitah by the mitzvah of Har Sinai. I will call on mitzvahs Arbu b'Sinai, so there are many answers, but that's what Orach Chaim HaKodesh writes, that Sinai equals Shemitah, that Klal Yisrael will give in Eretz Yisrael on the condition that we keep Sinai, we don't keep the mitzvahs. It's not a punishment, it's a natural consequence that Torah is going to throw us, vomit us out of the land. So they say Shemitah wasn't a punishment. If you don't keep the mitzvahs, then you just lose the schus. So either way, but it's not our concern now because we're post-Purim. We have to keep the Torah. So what do we see? So it's a kimu v'kibbul. So that's what the Shiltas writes. That we know why you have a Chi of Suda on Purim? Because it's a Kabbalah Satorah. Anytime you have a Kabbalah Satorah, you have a Chi of Suda. And that's why Shavuot, that's why the Rav Shach always likes saying, we know to paraphrase the Mishnah Rosh Hashanah, the 4 types of Rosh Hashanah. We always know Rosh Hashanah, we consider Judgment Day, Yom Kippur, but there's others, too, for the trees, etc. So Rav Shach likes saying there are 4 days of Kabbalah Satorah. So one is coming up next week, Shavuot, that's the Luchos Rishonos. Then we have Yom Kippur, we have the Luchos Shniyos. Purim, we have the Kedusha Halevi right. That is the halacha of Torah Sheba'al Peh. The Kimu v'Kiblu, that was basically the explosion of Torah Sheba'al Peh happened on that way. And what's the 4th one is more Derek Drush, but they say is more as Lag BaOmer, the one we just had, and that's Rav Shimon Bar Yochai revealing the Zohar. So we have the Luchos Rishonos and Shniyos, we have Torah Sheba'al Peh, and we have Kabbalah, and so all 4 are different types of Rosh Hashanah. So based on this Yisod, then we should have a Chi of Suda on Lag BaOmer. No one writes we do, but I'm saying, but I'm sure a lot of people have it anyway. But
in Meron.
Yeah, Meron, right. Oh, you were in Meron you were there on Lag BaOmer. Yeah, that's a whole discussion in terms of what goes on, and you could give us a first-hand report, but what goes on in Meron. But it seems to be a strange minhag that it's the death of Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, because normally in halacha, yortzites, well, that's more of a machlokas or an issue.
Those are for sure. Right, what flavor is that?
Oh, which ones are for Shavuot you want to know?
No.
So they're right. So we know yortzeit, that even the Hasidim, like it's feast or fast, as they write. So in Shulchan Aruch they bring down the minhag is to fast on a yortzeit. But Hasidim have a minhag of tikkun. Or Yaakov Kamenetsky explains the minhag, not necessarily or Shevach. The Hasidim, I'm sure, don't agree with Rav Yaakov on this one, but I'll tell you what Rav Yaakov says. your side, we fast. Where did it come to having tikkun? So I'll tell you how it came. We all know, Erev Pesach, there's a minute for the Bechors to fast. So what do? We have a siyum. So the minhag was on the yort side, instead of fasting, people used to make a siyum, and then after a siyum, you ate. So what happened was they dropped the siyum and left the tikkun. That's how the minhag developed, where people eat on the yort side. But either way, the Chassidim have more reasons al pi Kabbalah in terms of, but we assume, so our meaning is, we don't, even if you're going to have a tikkun, it's not a day of, even Moshe Rabbeinu, we don't celebrate Zayin Adar, we don't have a big party. In fact, the meaning of the Chevra Kadisha, all of the words to fast on Zayin Adar. So what's going on in Shimon Bar Yochai? We're going to have a feast and a tremendous celebration on Lag BaOmer, or to mix this Yom Tov. So what's going on there? So that's a major. So in the Chassidish from they explain the difference between Moshe Rabbeinu and Shimon Bar Yochai is that Moshe Rabbeinu's death was a sad case, in the sense that what? Because Moshe Rabbeinu, his life, Moshe was mitzvah to go into Eretz Yisrael and to be able to fulfill the mitzvahs of Tuyas Ba'aretz. He never made it, so it was sad in that sense. For Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, so something, we're not celebrating his death, but that's the day we have a tradition, the Chida writes, that he revealed the Zohar on that day. So that's why we're not celebrating the Yortzai, but that's the day where he actually revealed the Torah. So therefore, that's the fourth one in terms of that. That's what they point out, that 7 times 7 is always a number derech hateva, 8 is always a number lamala mi derech hateva. So they point out 7 times 7, that's the cycle between Pesach and Shavuot. Shavuot is the Torah Shebeksav. How many days are there between Purim and Lag BaOmer? Right, 64, 8 times 8. So 8 is always Mimala, so that's the hidden secrets. So Purim, that's why it says Plag. Pei is for Purim and Lag BaOmer. And that's why they point out, this is true anyway, that we know there's some type of connection because we know Purim and Lag BaOmer fall on the same day of the week. Purim fell out on Sunday, Lag BaOmer, it always happens that way, like Tisha B'Av and in Pesach. There's a link, whatever the link's going to be, there's definitely a link. So they point out that the link is that Purim, as we know, is the only time, it's the only book where it doesn't mention God in Tanakh, because God was hidden. So too, Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, he revealed the hidden secrets. So there are many links between Purim and Lag BaOmer, and that's the Kabbalah part. So that's what they point out here, that Yom Shedinah Torah, I would think that's the day Rabbi Lezer should say, Rabbi Hakol Moldim, you should learn all day. But no, Hakol Moldim, that you have to have a Suda, because anytime you have any accomplishment by Torah, you have an obligation to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu. In fact, that's the famous Nitziv in the beginning of Vayikra, and the Karban Toda. There are different, Karban Toda is a lot of food. Many loaves of some chavchala, some matzah, and it's impossible, they give you a very short time to eat it. It's impossible, and you can't leave it over, so it's impossible for one person, and even for a family, to finish it. So that's what the Ziv writes, by a Karban Toda, by a Thanksgiving sacrifice, God specifically gave you a short time and a big amount. You have a chiyuv to invite everyone else, and you have a chiyuv to make a Sudas Hodah, and tell everyone, share your miracle. So that's what they point out here. Every time there's an accomplishment with Torah, whether it was Shavuot, and obviously where's the meal on Yom Kippur? So some say it was Erev Yom Kippur. That's when we eat the meal. And whoever eats on Erev Yom Kippur, it's Kilu you fasted as well. But that's what they point out. It's a chiyuv in terms of that. And they point out that's why Yom Shedinah Torah is a day even Rabbi Lezer agrees. And this al pi hashkafa, that fits in very well with Judaism as well, because in other religions, quote-unquote religious, or the firmer you are. So what do you do? You go out, I want to live a religious, I'm going to go out to some monastery somewhere. I'm going to go away from all the people. In fact, that was the taina on Rav Shimon Bar Yochai. When he was studying in a cave. What happened was the Meister with Rav Shimon Bar Yochai, the Gemara, and they say Gemara Shabbos Lamed Gimel, to tie it into Lag BaOmer, that's what the Gemara is. So they point out the famous Meister that the Romans or whoever put out a decree to kill him, and he hid in a cave for 12 years. The Chazal tell us in the Gemara that he basically, a carob tree, that's why some people eat carobs, and the carob tree grew, and that's how they ate, and they took off their clothes and they dug holes so the clothes don't wear out. And then after 12 years, they say Eliyahu Hanavi came to him and said, don't worry, the Caesar's dead, it's safe to go out. he walked outside, he saw people working the land, and he just burned them up. And a Basco came down and said, get back in the cave, you're not ready for this world. And he goes back in, he studies another 2 years, he comes out, I think he sees someone's bringing flowers to his wife on Erev Shabbos. And he says, oh wow, you could use the physical things for spirit. And he realized that in this world you can incorporate the physical with the spiritual. So that's so in other religions, you don't get married, or you abstain from all the physical pleasures, that's considered kadosh. But Kedoshim Tiyu, that's in Judaism, it's a totally different definition. Kedoshim Tiyu is to Makadosh the whole, is we take the ribs, we take the fries, we take the food we like, and we use that to serve our Kadosh Baruch Hu. Judaism is, we both have a guf and a neshama. We have a physical part and a spiritual. If you disengage in one, in the guf parts, then you're gonna. So if a monkey could be happy just eating bananas all day, or whatever they eat, but he has no spiritual. But a human being, if he's just involved in the physical and no spiritual, you're gonna feel empty also. And conversely, you can't just do the spiritual without the physical. It's a combination. In fact, I think they say over. He's around. I think maybe it's Rav Grossman, the disco Rav in Israel. Yeah, but actually, I think it was him but he.
He used to go to discos like Friday evening.
Right, there's a whole. I'm not sure if it might be him or it's someone else. But he wrote a bunch of books. There's someone I'm not sure if it's him or someone like him. He used to go to the jails and all. He wrote a bunch. I think he was like it's the guy, the movie star. What's his name in Israel? The Zohar, yeah. What?
Uri Zohar.
Yeah, Uri Zohar, that's who it is. So he came from a non-observant background. In fact, non-observant, I'm using it lightly, anti-religious, kind of like Rabbi Akiva. And what happened was, so when he's writing in his books, he writes, and I'm pondering this question. I'm trying to figure out how come when I was a non-observant Jew, I just couldn't stand the religious Jews. Something about the religious Jews that just bothered me so much, and I couldn't figure out what it was. It just got to me. And he said, I was thinking about it, and this is what it was. He said, you know why? Because I'm saying, let's say I'm not observant, I'm not religious. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to be involved in all the physical pleasures. Okay, I don't believe in the next world, it's baloney, but I'm happy in this world. Okay, I'll take my chances, there's no next world. But these Orthodox Jews, they have a both. I see them engaging in all these tremendous pleasures. They have nice cars also, good food, good houses, they have all the physical pleasures, and they're still using it, and they're still very happy because they're using it to serve HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So that's Yom Shinabot Torah. It's specifically the day on Shavuot has to be a day of Lachem, because that's besides Api Halacha, as we pointed out, when you have a Kabbalah HaTorah, you have a Chiyuv to have a Suda, but Alpi Hashkafa as well, the whole Yisod of Torah is to Mekadesh the Chol, as the famous Medrash Tanchuma. We know, Chazal tell us that every Friday night, every Yom Tov, every Simcha, we make a bracha on Aboy Pri Hagafen every Simcha. So wine, we all know the dangers of wine now. We see it all the time, drinking, driving, the police are waiting for us. So Chazal weren't aware of the dangers of wine. They're telling us to drink all the time. So first let's point out they were aware. It's because it's an interesting Medrash Tanchuma, Parshas Noach, that I like to say over, that when Noach came out of the ark, so the Satan came down, whatever, they made a pact, and they slaughtered, because he was planting a vine tree, so with the wine, so they slaughtered 4 animals in this order: a lamb, a lion, a monkey, and a pig. So Chazal tell us why these 4 animals. So when a person drinks a little bit more than they should, they become as sleepy as a lamb. You drink a little more to the excess, you become as fearless as a lion. You drink a little more than that, you start acting like a monkey, jumping around, going psycho. And you drink totally to the excess, you start acting like a pig, throwing up, cursing, etc. So Chazal were well aware of the dangers of wine. Yet they said every Friday night, every Yom Tov, you have to go ahead and take the wine. People who are depressed and they drink wine, drink beer, so that just leads to helpless obey. They just get more depressed. But if you use wine as a tool for simcha, that's why the one Chazal that says the reason it gave it to Menachem the Avel, when a person's down, it's okay. We believe in artificial means to get get besimcha, and that's why, in fact, that's why they call it SAD, S-A-D, seasonal adjustment disorder. It's the doctors have come around to Judaism, that during the time period when it's darker, like the long winter days, so they say that more people have depression, suicides, because there's something about light that brings besimcha. We all know that Shalom Bayis, the Gemara tells us Friday night, you have to have there's nothing worse than stubbing your toe, and then there's the tension in the room, and everybody ready to explode. This light brings some type of joy, and light, music, food. We see music by Elisha. Elisha said, "Kanuli menagen, get me up. I want to get my nevuah. I want to get simcha. Get me some music going." And we know Yaakov Avinu, before the bracha, get me a nice piece of meat to get me going. So there's nothing wrong. It's always a tool to get to the end. In fact, nothing wrong. In fact, it's a mitzvah. The tools are the mitzvah as well. That's the whole concept here. So Chazal are well aware of the dangers of wine and all the other things, but the concept of Kedoshim, in contrast to other religions, is to take all the physical, as the Yerushalmi points out, after 120 years, you're going to be asked, did you enjoy the pleasures of this world? Did you go to the Niagara Falls? I think as Rav Hirsch writes, did you go to the Swiss Alps, or wherever the places you could have went, because God gave these pleasures for us to enjoy. Of course, the permitted ones. So therefore, they point out. So that's what So that's the yesod here. That in terms of Yom Tov, on one hand, Yom Shin about Torah, we have a Chi of Suda because of Kabbalah Torah. And as well, Api Hashkafa, the whole essence of Judaism is to Makadesh Techol, is to take all the gifts that we have and go ahead, and use the meat, the wine, etc., and reach a level, of Sudas Yom Tov.